Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Pro Wrestling Mecca of the world in Cleveland, Ohio. I am your dangerously, dashingly, strikingly, ever so smooth talking trash, talking sky, walking host Nick. And with me, as always, is nobody because this is PWP TV. Hello, and welcome again. And I have got to tell you guys some awesome news, but first, if you want to hit up the show, the Gmail is prowrestlingpod@gmail.com. Once again, prowrestlingpod@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter at ProWPodcast. Once again, at ProWPodcast. Available on iTunes, Podcast X, Spreaker, Amazon Alexa, and right here on YouTube. I'll leave a link in the description below for the Gmail and the Twitter page. Now, the good news that I have to share, it's kind of exciting, I think. We're going to change things up on PWP TV. For a while, it was kind of just 10-minute random ranting type videos, which the length of the videos is still going to be the same. It's still going to be 10 minutes-ish, sometimes over, sometimes under, whatever. However, we're going to change up how we do it a little bit. Just a little, nothing huge. Every month is going to have a different theme to it. Instead of just random videos about random things from the past and sometimes things from the future, I want to make this show a little bit more as like a retrospect a little bit. And I kind of felt that the best way to do that really is each month will be about a certain topic. So to give you guys a little heads up, August is going to be about wrestling controversies. We're going to talk about my personal, I don't want to say favorites, but just things that kind of just stuck out to me. September is why companies failed month. So every single week, we're going to be running down a promotion and talking about briefly and then why it failed, things like that. And then October is probably going to be one of my favorites. Feuds that are just too sweet. Obviously, it's a playoff of too sweet, whoop whoop. But at the same time, it's more or less some of my favorite feuds that I think you guys would be interested in, that I think a lot of people would be really. So that's just to give you guys a little preview about the first 3 months here on PWP TV. So hopefully you guys will enjoy this little twist. Again, it's not much. It's just a little bit of an altered version of the show, if you want to view it like that. So without further ado, we're going to get into the very, very first one of this new format. And since it is Wrestling Controversies Month, I want to talk about, what better controversy to talk about than the Montreal Screwjob. Now, you all know the story about the Montreal Screwjob, but unless if you've been living under a rock or if you're a brand new wrestling fan that just happened to stumble upon PWP TV and Pro Wrestling Podcast, along with Quick Hits, I'll give you a plug, Matt. Really, the Montreal Screwjob is one of those moments that will never be erased and can never be erased. The gist of it, I don't want to give like an abridged version, but it's my show, so I can do what I want. But no, basically, so the story goes, Shawn Michaels and HBK, Shawn Michaels is HBK, Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart, they kind of had disdain for each other in the early 90s. Neither one, from the early to mid 90s, Shawn had all of his drug problems. Bret, as a lot of people may or may not say, Bret was kind of a bit of an egomaniac back then. He had a bit of an ego to him. The story goes that they did not like each other, to put it bluntly. They did not like each other. Shawn accused Bret of some things. Bret accused Shawn of some things, and their matches and their feud became very personal. Vince saw this as an opportunity. Now, something to keep in mind going into the Montreal Screwjob was Bret Hart was WWE champion. He had a clause in his contract that was creative control. Something that I'd never understood why they gave wrestlers to begin with, but he had creative control. And Bret Hart was not going to lose the title to Shawn in Montreal, where Survivor Series was. Pay-per-view was coming up. They had some Raw before. Raw was in Detroit. Survivor Series was going to be in Montreal, Bret's hometown. So he said no. And something to keep in mind, this was also Bret Hart's last contractually obligated date with Survivor Series. After that, he was a free man, but he already told Vince he was going to WCW. It's not like he was hiding that from Vince. He told Vince he was going to WCW. So Vince said, well, you're the champion. You need to lose the belt. I can't have you go on Nitro with the title because at this point, Medusa, who was WWE Women's Champion, went on Nitro, threw the belt in the garbage. And Vince kind of felt like Brett was going to do the same thing, and rightfully so. I don't blame him. Well, Brett said, I'm not losing it to Shawn in Montreal. I'll lose it to him in Detroit, the Raw before, or even though I'm a free man, I will still come out Monday night and I'll relinquish the title. I'm not losing to Shawn in Montreal. So Brett was very hell-bent on that. Story goes, and depending on who you talk to, details get a little murky, but Vince had a private meeting between Shawn, Triple H, and I believe Pat Patterson and Gerald Briscoe, who Pat Patterson more or less was like Vince's right-hand man with everything. He was like a consultant of Vince's, essentially. So they said, well, what are our options? Okay, because Brett doesn't want to lose to Shawn in Montreal. I can't have Shawn beat Brett in Detroit, the Raw before, because we built the pay-per-view on Shawn versus Brett for the title. It kind of defeats the purpose if we do it a week early. So they laid out all these different kind of options. A double count out screw finish was discussed. Tons of disqualifications were discussed. A lot of different scenarios were thrown out. Thing is, nothing really stuck. So they thought, and according to Shawn and Vince, and I'm sure everybody but Hunter, Hunter said, screw it. If he doesn't want to do business, we'll do business for him. And that seems to be a pretty famous quote, even though it's not actually one that was quote unquote said. So all that being said, Montreal comes. It's Survivor Series. The show itself was really good. You get to the main event, Brett versus Shawn. They put on a pretty emotional match. It was a very good match, which I think sucks because this whole detail of the screw job hinders the actual performance. It was a very good match. I highly suggest anyone who has the WWE Network, or even if you don't, sign up, go watch this match. It actually is a really good match. The finish happens, and what happened was Shawn puts Brett in the sharpshooter, Bret Hart's own finishing move. Brett doesn't tap. Earl Hebner rings the bell. So they basically forced Brett's hand and gave the belt to Shawn. Afterwards, Brett would trash ringside, throw monitors down, smash anything he can. Spits in Vince's face, writes WCW in the air, and just all this different stuff. Then afterwards, when the cameras weren't rolling, he punches Vince's lights out. And that was Bret Hart's last match appearance in WWE until 2010. He comes back. He has a match against Vince at WrestleMania. It wasn't actually. I think he had a few, but with Bret's stroke, it really limited his ability in the ring. So they kind of got a little creative with how they booked Bret. But that's a different story. Anyway, so where do I stand with the Montreal Screwjob? Well, Brett feels that he was a national hero or a Canadian hero at the very least. And that's why he didn't want to drop it to Shawn. I don't buy that for a second. I think Brett just genuinely hated Shawn, even though he won't admit it, he did. And I think that that's why Brett screwed Brett. I don't want to be that guy, but I'm going to be that guy. Vince came out a week later, I think, on TV and said those famous words, Brett screwed Brett, and I actually agree with Vince. Thing is, I don't agree with how WWE did it. I think that Brett is an honorable man. I do think in the bottom of my heart, I believe Bret Hart would have went on Raw the next night and gave up his title, not to Shawn, but to Vince. Because Brett cares, and that's his problem. He cares too much. he has a lot of pride, and I don't blame him for it. You know, he takes pride in who his family is. He takes pride in his ability, his work ethic, and rightfully so. The problem with Brett is that he's his own worst enemy, and it's a lot like Shawn. Shawn and Brett are a lot alike. You know, they both have high egos about themselves, as they should. They both are talented beyond all belief in the ring. So for them to have this hatred for one another, it's a little surprising because they're both so much alike. Again, where I stand though personally, I think there were just better ways of doing it. I don't know how, but I think that either side had to give a little bit, and neither side was willing to budge. And that to me was the biggest, like, soul crushing thing that could have happened, because of course this created the Vince McMahon character. Vince McMahon character went on to feud with Shawn Michaels and Triple H, and then The Rock and Steve Austin and all those guys in the 90s. Well, as for Brett, things didn't really pan out so well. He went to WCW, but they didn't debut him for about like 8 months or something like that. It's like, you're sitting on wrestling gold. Why isn't this guy out there night one saying, yeah, you know what, I got screwed, blah, blah, blah. You could have made him into the ultimate anti-hero, but instead WCW, like WCW normally did back then, just crapped on it. And that blows my mind. But of course, Shawn and Brett made up in the ring in 2010. Brett had his match with Vince at that U7. I still think both sides have resentment, whether they admit it or not. They both resent one another. They'll work with each other because it's best for business, but they still don't like each other. And it's a weird, semi-toxic relationship. Hopefully that gets resolved. But I'll tell you what is resolved. The very first episode of the new PWP TV, talking about wrestling controversies. And the first one is the one that probably started all the controversies, and that is the Montreal Screwjob. So that will wrap things up for this episode. You want to hit up the show. The Gmail's ProWrestlingPod@gmail.com. Once again, ProWrestlingPod@gmail.com. The Twitter page is @ProWPodcast. Once again, @ProWPodcast. Available on iTunes, Podcast X, Spreaker, Amazon Alexa, and right here on YouTube. We host the show every other Sunday. No set time. I try to have it up by 10 a.m. Eastern. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I do what I can. I'm just one man, I'm running all the techie stuff. So bear with us this week. It's going to be awesome because we're actually going to be in Matt's town. We're not going to be in mine in the Nerd Cave where we do the show, which is where I'm at right now, which doesn't really look like a Nerd Cave from where I'm broadcasting. But either way, this Sunday show is going to be from Matt's house in Parma. So that's going to be pretty cool. Again, if you want to hit up the show, Gmail's ProWrestlingPod@gmail.com. Once again, ProWrestlingPod@gmail.com. Twitter page is @ProWPodcast. Once again, @ProWPodcast. Available on iTunes, Podcast X, Spreaker, Amazon Alexa, and right here on YouTube. My name is Nick. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.